Mark, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here.
So I want to get into some deep, weighty things because I'm following your Substack right now, and I want to just tell our listeners, and I get nothing from this, right? This is just pure, unadulterated sincerity. Your Substack is fantastic. I mean, you're really using the medium well, and I think it's it's great. Just the right amount of content. I mean, it's not long. It's not.
I'm having
overbearing.
fun with it, and I'm trying to do like once or twice per week. And I'm well aware that I don't have as much to say as some people do. You look at one of those people like Nate Silver or Matt Iglesias, who has just kind of thousands of words a week, and many of them are good. The percentage, their batting percentage is really high. And I'm not like that when it comes to content. I don't have that many ideas or that much to say. So I try to be, mindful of that and not waste people's time.
You wrote something about the Eagles. I'm in Philadelphia, and it has been I was downtown last Sunday for after they won. I was watching the game with a friend in Jersey, and I was coming back to Center City and just getting out of the Pat Coast train, and just downtown was insane. I mean, it was I was just thinking about, because you were talking about how you had this moment where you didn't have anything to do, and you watched the Eagles, and it brought you back to professional football.
Which is weird, because I was never a huge football fan. The height of my fandom was really baseball fandom when I was 10 or 11 years old, and I was not an NFL guy. I mean, I followed the Giants a bit. The Phil Simms years were great. They won a couple Super Bowls, and that was great, and that was fun. And then I think there was another great Giants team, I want to say in the mid aughts, 2007, 8, 9, something like that. Because I remember I was with my friend Derek in his TV room watching that Super Bowl. So that places at the time. But it was really that it brought me back to sports fandom, and I remembered why I loved it. And I was a little bit prepared for this, because when I was writing my book about the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, I spent so much time in Pittsburgh. And that's a town where sports really did help pull people together. It's just a great aspect of their, municipal spirit and civic spirit. And that was just great. So I think I was kind of attuned and open to falling in love with a team. Now, as someone pointed out to me, I then missed the next game that they were in, but or a bit of it. But I'll be back next week for the Super Bowl. So, it's still, any fandom I have will still have to work its way around my life as a dad, as a dog owner, as an employee with many bosses. But it was fun. It was pure, unadulterated joy. I didn't feel cynical about it. I didn't feel like I was faking it. I loved the snow. I loved watching players play in the snow, which is a great thing about football. And, as I said, my mom's whole family is from Philadelphia. I mean, I have dozens of cousins in the Philly area, because my mom's dad was one of 8 and my mom's mom was one of 10, and they all had kids, and and a lot of them stayed in the 215 area code. So, it feels
and you can, what's interesting about Philadelphia, I think it's like the biggest second tier city, right? I mean, at one point it was the biggest city in the colonies. It was the center of the Americas.
Right. And for a long time, it was number 4. I mean, even in my own lifetime, I feel like after New York, Chicago, LA, Philly held steady at number 4 for a long time. I think it has probably now fallen behind Houston
and Phoenix.
And Phoenix. Is Philly still in the top 10 though?
Number 6. Number 6.
Okay.
But it's different. I mean,
to be honest, is Phoenix a city? I mean, or is it a retirement village? I don't know.
It is, and that's what I would say is different in Philadelphia. It's, even though it's not New York or Chicago or LA, it still feels big and yet like small, like in the sense of the camaraderie you have around the Eagles. I mean, I got onto a trolley the other day, and under my breath, I saw this. I subliminally, I said, "Go Birds!" And this woman just turned at me and goes, "Go Birds!" Like, I mean, you just it's phenomenal. But on to weightier things than the Eagles. You wrote on your Substack, responding to an Atlantic piece that was talking about the rise of the new apostolic Christianity. Something Peter Wagner called
the New Apostolic Reformation or something.
New Apostolic Reformation, right? A guy from Fuller or something, Peter Wagner, used to write about this, and the tone of this was: the Christians are coming, the Christians are coming, the Christians are coming. Oneth by land, twoeth by sea. that Jew, agnostic, progressive, beware that, we are 3 months away from The Handmaid's Tale. I mean, this is, and you
Right.
wrote a response to this, and you actually said this
Right.
was fear mongering.
Yeah, so I should say, as a Jew, as someone who believes in pluralism, as someone who doesn't want theocracy in any country, that I should be fertile soil for this kind of argument. I mean, if you're going to monger fear, I would be very worried if there were a real chance that Christian theocracy were coming. And now, of course, lots of people, possibly a majority of people, come to their political beliefs by way of some sort of prior beliefs that may be religious, they may be secular and atheistic, but grounded in some sort of first principles. Everyone comes to their politics with something other than just their latest political analysis or policy analysis. They come with prior convictions, and that's as it has to be, right? And some people come with a prior conviction that the Gospels are true. Some people come with a prior conviction that everything National Public Radio says is true, or that for some people, the first principle that says that a woman's right to choose to have an abortion if she wants is sacred, is as powerful and non-controvertible as some Christians believe, not all, but some Christians believe that abortion is always wrong at any stage. So people come with these priors, and then they have to fight it out in a democracy and win votes and make make Supreme Court appointments and pass legislation. And it shouldn't really matter too much to us what their prior convictions are. The question is, are they promoting policies that'll work in a pluralistic society? But if there are people who are basically ready to turn over all policy making wisdom to just what will spread Christianity further and faster, that would be a problem, right? If their first principles are more Christians rather than a better functioning America that's fairer and better for more Americans, then I would take issue with that. My problem is that this article in The Atlantic, like a lot of articles in this genre, is just based on very shoddy research, and it does well. It finds a home and finds an audience because there are so many secular people who are primed to believe that Christianity is secret and sinister. And I've just never seen the evidence, at least in the past 25 years that I've been paying attention to this stuff, that there is some Christian theocratic groundswell coming. So, to put a finer point on it, I don't have the article in front of me, but there were claims in it that some astonishing number of Americans, tens of millions, and 30 or 40%.
I think it says 40% of all Christians are in this movement.
40% of all Christians are in this movement, the New Apostolic Reformation, which believes that the end times are near, which believes that Christians should take over 7 different branches of human life, like the arts, culture, education, government, that are the 7 mountains, or
the
something.
7 pillar mountains.
Seven. And the argument is that here are these incredibly reactionary, right-wing, hyper-Orthodox, hyper-traditionalist Christian beliefs, and 40% of all Christians believe them. Well, I've met almost no Christians who believe them, and I do this for a living, so I was really surprised. 40%, tens of millions of Americans. And then when you dig down and look at the evidence, it comes from these polls of like a few hundred people, or maybe they polled 1,500, and then of those 1,500, half of them were Christians, and then of the Christians, they then polled them on not, are you part of the New Apostolic Reformation, but they polled them on certain tenets or supposed tenets of the NAR, including, do you think that Christians should, exercise control over these 7 mountains? Now, if you ask people, do you believe that Christians should be running the government? A lot of people who aren't particularly theocratic or authoritarian might say yes. And what they might mean is, like, I want good Christian men to run the government. Then if you said, well, what about good Jews? And they might say, oh, well, if they behave like good Christians, sure. And Muslims too. Like, what they mean by, I want Christians in charge might be, it might be, I want Orthodox Christians to enforce Christian will with violence if necessary. But at the other extreme, it might be, if you give me a binary choice between, do you want Christians or non-Christians running whatever, the Department of Treasury, I'll pick Christians. Like, maybe they'll be a little more honest. I think that's a naive way of looking at the world, but it's not necessarily sinister. So what they did was they tested people on certain tenets, certain questions, yes or no. Should Christians be running this? Do you believe that the end times are near? Well, near, a lot of people have a sense like, wow, we're living in the end of days. That doesn't mean they think that all policy should be oriented toward only a horizon of 1 year because the world is ending in 13 months. Like, you want to be careful what you infer from this stuff. And what they then inferred, having quizzed people on these tenets, they then said, well, these tenets are also the tenets of the New Apostolic Reformation. And of these, 1,100 people, 483 of them agreed with these tenets. And therefore, we can say that 40% of all Christians agree with these tenets. And these are the tenets of the NAR. And therefore, 40% of all of this country's 100 and some odd million Christians are members of the New Apostolic Reformation.
And but I had friends quoting this article that I'm on this social audio platform called Clubhouse, which it's sort of is a background, almost like radio for me, right? And it's it's like it's hard to explain if you're not on it. But I have people that are learned people that read the Atlantic stuff, and they're quoting this thing as if theocracy is around the corner, and I'm thinking this is just not. It's not real. And it's funny. I dug into a Pew study here. This is from 2025. This is brand new. This is a week ago. So they asked a Christian nationalist, they determined would be a Christian who says 4 things. Being a Christian is very important to being truly American. It's very important that the U.S. president shares their religious beliefs, and the Bible should have at least some influence over U.S. laws. And the 4th is, and when the Bible conflicts with the will of the people, the Bible should have more influence. 6% of Americans believe that, as opposed to like 46% in Indonesia or Bangladesh. It would be religious national. So it's just very interesting. As religious as a country that we are, compared to say Western Europe, when you parse this stuff out, most people even want a fairly secular culture.
And there are other data points that are really important here. For example, we know that the kind of peak evangelical megachurch moment, the Willow Creek, Joel, what's his name? Osteen down in Houston. Like,
I've used the restrooms at that church. I was next door eating lunch with somebody. Nice? Flushes like a jet engine. That's a really, really nice restroom. And
got like a nice bidet with the one.
Not a bidet, but it says, and look, they didn't let people stay there during the hurricane, but they did let me use their bathroom.
So they let you use your bathroom. But peak megachurch we're past it. And in fact, if you look at some of the large evangelical denominations, the Southern Baptist Convention, I think the number of new baptisms every year is declining. It peaked, some years ago, a few years back. And that moment where it seemed like the mega churches, the big, non-denominational Bible church evangelicals were taking over the country, that is not what anyone thinks anymore. And what's more, there's a lot of questions about, how well are other kinds of conservative Christians, some would say that term is debatable in this case, like the Latter-day Saints, like the Mormons, how well are they reproducing themselves? It looked for a number of years like this was a community of people that was having 3, 4, 5 kids per family, and they had high retention, and they were just going to keep growing and growing. There's now evidence that shows actually that's not true. The birth rate has slowed. The retention is not what they thought it was. The evidence that this country is moving towards conservative Christianity as its main way of being was much stronger 10 years ago than it is now. So, as one friend of mine said to me, well, okay, but the thing about the New Apostolic Reformation is maybe it's not numbers, maybe it's not quantity, but quality. What's the quality of their conviction? How strongly do they believe? And here we get into something that's a little bit hard to prove one or the other. I'm going on gut here. My general feeling about Americans is most of us are, to our great credit, lazy couch potatoes who are not, we're much more interested in watching the Birds win the Super Bowl than we are in taking up arms to make sure that the state house shares our beliefs. So yeah, you get 300 some odd white supremacists turning out for Charlottesville. You have a few hundred people at the January 6th riots, which is horrible. I don't mean to minimize that. But in a country of over 300 million people, is there evidence that there's a real body of people willing to go to the barricades for anything either liberal or illiberal? I mean, when you go to a country like Israel, where people really do follow politics to their great credit, and then compare it to the US, where most people don't know who their lieutenant governor is, it's just hard to make the case that Christian nationalism is around the corner, because it's hard to make the case that anything's around the corner. My greatest fear is, in fact, what's around the corner is just so much inattention to politics and so much indifference that it allows for a kind of corrupt kleptocracy. Like, that's my concern about the Trump administration, is not that we're going to be herded into concentration camps, or that that we're all going to be forced to to tattoo the 10 commandments on our left thigh or whatever. I mean, it's more just that as we fall asleep at the wheel, and we stop paying attention because we're relatively prosperous even in our worst recession, and we're smug and we're uneducated and we don't read the news and whatever, that it will just become corrupt. And that's bad.
Yeah,
but it's not Christian. But it's not Christian nationalism.
yeah. I mean, I was watching Bill Maher this weekend, and he cited this study among Gen Zs in England, and the correlate is about the same here. 50% of Gen Zs thought that really you need a strong man running England that's not accountable to Parliament. And that's not ideological. And that's just the sense that government doesn't work, right? And like what you're saying, it opens up the kleptocracy space, right? Like, hey, get the guy that's a business guy, and he'll come in.
It's a totally stupid way of looking at it, and I have no patience for it. I don't think any of this. I don't think that indifference and a kind of resignation to kleptocracy or the strongman or the thug is a good thing at all. I was just talking to a friend of mine from India who said, look, a few years ago, India didn't feel fascist under Modi, and now it does. And I do think that these things they can creep up on you. Bad government, can creep up on you. I have a number of theories about this. There are a lot of things that concern me more than white nationalism concerns me. I'm concerned about kleptocracy and corruption. I'm concerned the country's too big, and that we may, at our present size, never again be able to command the kind of unified, relatively unified patriotism, loyalty, spirit, and sense of civic duty that allowed us to fight and win World War II. That there just might be. I think each of our Congress people is representing too many people, and the sense that them, that anybody who's making decisions over your life may be lost. But it's not lost to liberalism. It's not lost to illiberalism. It's lost to kind of just decrepitude, lethargy, the size of the country, and a lot of other things that may be structural and that we may not have easy answers for.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, and I've thought this for years, and it's the sense of this has become more acute again for me. Everyone in America feels like they're in exile, right? If you're a conservative, right now, even though you've got everything, right? You've got the Congress, you've got the court, you've got the president, and you've got the cultural icon of president, the guy that can just suck up all the air in the room. It's a liberal takeover. We're going socialist, right? Yeah. If you're a Democrat, if you're a liberal, we're becoming fascist, right? I mean, if you're people feel like it's white nationalists, or oh my gosh, we're losing our heritage, or it seems like everybody feels like their issues, their commitments, their sense of identity is under threat, and that they're in a state of exile. And everybody can't be in exile, right?
I've always, we can't all be in exile. I've always felt that localism is the way to go. Now, again, as somebody who's grateful that our country pulled it together to fight and win World War II, I realize there are problems with a kind of dogmatic localism, And for a while, I'm no longer into some of the stuff I was into for a while. For a while, I was charmed by the idea of local currencies. There are people who circulate local currencies that you can only spend at your farmer's market and the basket weaving store and the, massage parlor or whatever, all the nice progressive businesses in your local.
No, that doesn't seem progressive to me when you just say the farmer's market and the massage parlor.
I mean an actual massage. I don't mean.
Okay.
The pornographic.
It was that's not a euphemism. No. All right.
No, it's not a euphemism. It's a lot of the massage is very big in the same kinds of communities in which food locavorism is big, and I was very interested in local currencies. at one point in grad school, I wanted to write my dissertation on New England secessionism, which was briefly a thing in the early 1800s, because I thought, wouldn't it have been interesting if the New England states were our own small country? And I think there's a kind of spirit and vitality you find in countries that are a bit smaller. I mean, Ireland, Israel. I don't know what's going on in Luxembourg and Liechtenstein, but there's the countries that are more the size of New England than the size of us seem to have a certain specialness, a sense of intimacy, a sense that people know each other, that they've got each other's back. I think it's easier to build esprit de corps. So I'm no longer as radical about it as I once was, but I do look at the United States, and I've long looked at the United States and thought it's a big project to ask Arkansas to care about the wildfires in California, right? I mean, that's just and to ask people in Oregon to care about the hurricanes in Florida. I mean, it's just a big country with a lot of people, and John Tierney, the great New York Times, the former columnist, wrote a great piece years ago about how much more prosperous he thought Brooklyn would be if it were by itself, that the boroughs would all be better off by themselves had they not been yoked into New York City. I don't know if it's true or not, but it was a great thought experiment. And, one of the things I want to say to a lot of my friends who are not pleased with the national government right now is like, well, states' rights are looking pretty good at the moment. It can be a nefarious ideology, but at this moment, it could also be the ideology for such a time and place. So, I'm okay being governed by my Connecticut legislature. I don't agree with them on everything. We should have high-speed rail.
I think that way about things like guns, right? I mean, I look in Philadelphia. I think we just need a different approach to guns than in Wyoming, right? I mean, you probably can have an assault weapon in Wyoming. It's probably okay. I mean,
I certainly think that look, the cultures around guns are so substantially different in different places. I mean, Pennsylvania is a little tricky, right? Because you actually have a big hunting community in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
But Massachusetts and Connecticut, less so. We have something of one, and there are a lot of responsible gun users around. But I think of my uncle in Alabama, who is an avid hunter, would never use guns for anything except hunting. Keeps them locked up in like a closet, inside a safe, inside a closet. He's exactly the gun owner you want. Responsible, well-trained, hunts, but would never use guns on people ever. Doesn't own pistols, owns hunting rifles. And look, he's living in a different culture, and the gun laws are going to be different in Alabama than they're going to be in Connecticut. Somewhat different, although they're not so different. I mean, the right to bear arms is a pretty powerful right everywhere in this country. But the idea that we should be making all legislation one size fits all is, even if it were correct, it may not be pragmatic.
Mark, you also edit a journal, Arc, which comes out of Washington University in St. Louis. And by the way, for our listeners, I mean, it's great. I mean, I would say get online there. If you're interested in the kind of things that we talk about on this podcast, you're going to love it. And you wrote a piece there. You reviewed Jonathan Rauch's book. His new book is Cross Purposes, Christianity's Broken Bargain with Democracy. And you say it's both an apology and an apologia, right? It's an apology to his college roommate who was a Christian, and now he's sort of getting to understand his beliefs a bit better over a long friendship, through adulthood. And also it's a defense of the leavening effect faith could have if we could recover something of core Christianity, that it might have a good leavening effect in public life.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Rauch, R-A-U-C-H, who's a great public thinker and really nifty guy. He's, by the way, famous. His most famous piece was the piece he did for The Atlantic maybe 15 years ago about being an introvert. And all of the discourse we now have around how everyone will talk about whether they're an introvert or an extrovert was basically jump-started by that piece. It's not that the ideas didn't exist before that, but his piece on caring for your introvert really put it in the public discourse in a way that nothing had before. So he's the guy who gave us introvert versus extrovert as we talk about it now. But his new piece is his argument as a gay atheist Jew that we need more Christianity in public life. And as you suggested, what he's arguing is that it was good for public life when more people went to church, that it held people together, created community better, perhaps trained people in some good habits of cooperation, of listening, of pluralism. And also that what's replaced it as we've moved away from being churched is not as good. That what we do with our Sunday mornings, or in some case Saturday mornings or Friday nights now, be it watching TV, be it sports gambling, be it spending time on the internet porn, perhaps attaching to politics in an unhealthy, cultish, polarizing way, that all of these things are worse for the body politic than church life had been, and that we need more congregational life. And even, I don't remember how deeply he goes into it because I read the book a few months ago, but even the kind of churches we have now that are doing well, if they're big mega churches that are drawing people from, a 1,000 square mile radius, and they come in on Sunday morning and they listen to the rock band and they sing and they pray, but it's not a neighborhood church where people know each other and where people are going to show up on Tuesday night to make sandwiches for the soup kitchen, and where people are going to visit each other in the hospital as much. I mean, the mega churches try to build some of that, but they're not as good at it as the huge network of just smaller, First Methodist, Third Presbyterian, Bethesda Lutheran that we used to have on every street corner, that we have on every corner in New Haven where I live, and so many of them have been turned into condominiums. And I basically liked his book a lot. I think it's a really good book, and I did end it with a question, which is, okay, so my atheistic Jewish friend Jonathan Rauch, like, when are you going back to synagogue? Because he makes it pretty clear this isn't for him. And there is a kind of poignant irony at the heart of the book, which is he is recommending organized religion for others while saying that it doesn't speak to him. I would push him further on that and say, yeah, it doesn't speak to you. There were always lots of people it didn't speak to who went anyway, because what spoke to them was the community. And saying, well, I don't hear God in church. Well, you know what? A lot of people don't hear God in church, but what they might hear is the call to be part of the community, and they keep going for reasons other than the immanence of God.
I always think in any congregation, Jewish, Christian, I haven't thought about this a lot with mosques, but I think in churches and synagogues, you probably have 10, 12% of true believers, right? Hey, and this is just dispositional. They'd be a true believer in anything. And then you have 10 to 12% that are perpetual doubters, and they'd be doubters and skeptics anywhere. And then you have the 80, 75, 80%. Then, one day they're more faith. It's more faith. One day it's more doubt. It's complex. And it's just a messy. And I think everybody just lives there, right? In religious life.
I think that's exactly right. I think, to me, the question is not, are you an atheist or are you a believer, but are you an atheist right now, or are you a believer right now? And I don't think that's dodging the question. I just think it's a reality that people move in and out. Most people, again, except for the 10% on either end, most people move in and out of wonder, belief, whatever you want to call it. And to me, it's almost an uninteresting question. The question of whether you're choosing to walk with these people through life, asking these questions, doing these rituals, helping each other, is a much more profound question than, do you believe in God? It's similar. I mean, it's funny. Belief in anything is almost a weird, useless question. Do I believe in America? I mean, sometimes I'm moved by the promise of America and I feel very patriotic. Sometimes I'm at the other end where I think, all nationalism is idolatry. And then most of the time I just do what I do because it's who I am, because, it makes more sense to go through the American rituals and to be excited about the 4th of July and to tear up a little bit on Thanksgiving and to just do it than to interrogate it. And I think life must be very hard for people who are hyper literalist. Like there are people I know who will say the whole prayer service, but then there's this one prayer that has something in it that they think is objectionable. That's like, it's sexist, or it's too nationalistic, or it's too bloody and warlike and martial, or it's, and so they make a show of pursing their lips during that prayer. They're like, blah, 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 blah. They're not going to say that prayer, or they walk out of the room for that moment. And I think, oh, come on, nobody's watching. If God's not watching, or maybe God is, but if God is, God knows what's in your heart and doesn't care if you look to be assenting to a prayer you don't actually believe
and
in.
That seems exhausting. The way you describe it, that seems exhausting. Yeah.
Like, what must it be like to go through life like that, always feeling that you're on stage being vetted for authenticity or honesty or scrupulosity? I think it'd just be terrible.
Mark, I know you got to go. Thanks for the time you gave me. If I was just going to ask you one last thing, because you're a guy that ingests a lot of interesting material. If you were going to recommend one thing to read right now, or it could be a podcast too, something that you've just engaged that our listeners would really benefit from, something that really caught your imagination.
I love that question. I didn't come prepared. I mean, I think what have I loved lately? I mean, I've really I'm reading Oliver Twist by Dickens right now, which is amazing. It's a wonderful book. I've never read it. I mean, like most of us, so there's what I haven't read would fill a lot of bookshelves. So I'm really enjoying Oliver Twist, and it speaks to the way that the rich kind of decide that the poor are culpable, that they deserve to be poor. That's kind of the theme of the first 100 pages, anyway. I love Tyler Cowen's podcast, Conversations with Tyler, and he's an economist at George Mason University, but his podcast is just whatever he finds interesting. And he just had an episode with Joe Boyd, the record producer, who is one of the world's great experts on world music, but also, produced an REM album. He produced Fables of the Reconstruction. He produced Richard and Linda Thompson. He's just this extraordinary record producer. And I love hearing about the way art comes together, especially when it's an art I'm terrible at, like music. So I thought the Joe Boyd episode of Tyler Cowen's podcast was great. My wife and I have been watching The Morning Show on Apple Plus with Reese Witherspoon and Jennifer Aniston, which is a show we somehow missed when it debuted, and that's really good. I don't know. There's like stuff out there. I try to keep my news diet light so it doesn't get me down.
Well, it's working.
I always try to be reading other stuff and watching and listening to other stuff. What about you, Scott Jones? What do you recommend for people right now?
I'll tell you, a guest I had on the show recently, I'm rereading his book, Todd McGowan, Embracing Alienation, Why We Shouldn't Try to Find Ourselves. And it was so good. I had him on the show a couple months ago, and I'm rereading the book. I read it for the conversation, and it's so good. It's short. I mean, it's 175 pages or maybe 190 pages.
I love a short book. But
it's all about how alienation isn't a problem. That the sense that we feel like we have conflicted identities. Actually, that's liberative, not a problem. So it's a great book.
I couldn't agree more. I just want to throw out one other one that I realized I read recently and just loved, which was a book about surfing and Buddhism by a guy. It was called Saltwater Buddha, by a guy named Jamail Yogis, last name Yogis, like yogis. And it's he's like a Jubu, like part Jewish, part Buddhist, and he's a surfer. He left high school at one point to surf in Hawaii. And I'm kind of a wannabe surfer and a wannabe Buddhist. I'm a wannabe everything. So, but that book, it's short, it's elliptical, it's brief, a lot of vignettes about surfing and Buddhism. It sounds like the kind of thing you might hate, especially if you have a strong sense of irony, the way I do. But I really loved it.
It's great.
I really loved it. I thought it was just beautiful. And it made me want to be a surfing Buddhist, a saltwater Buddha.
Well, look, I mean, New Haven is just the place to start to take up that lifestyle.
Totally.
Thanks.
Right.
Thanks so much.
It's not like Long Island blocks all the waves. It's not like we actually don't have surf because
it's just you don't do it up there. It's just not the thing.
All right, man. Take it easy.
Thanks so much.